We are joined by Hilary Fagan of the Rhode Island Commerce Corporation, and she's going to host a discussion with some offshore wind developers. Today we have Matt Morrissey from Orsted, Christopher Hardy from Mayflower Wind, Elisabeth Treseder from Equinor Wind, and Jennifer Cullen from Vineyard Wind. And thank you again for everyone for joining us. And please, Hilary, take it away.
Great, thank you. This is a group that's driving the development of the U.S. offshore wind industry. And in light of these crazy times and what's happening with the nation and the high unemployment, this is certainly a bright spot for the country. So we're very thankful for this group. What I'm going to do is ask each panelist to provide a brief introduction of their company and also their roles. And I think we'll do ladies first and start with Jennifer.
I'm Jennifer Cullen. I am manager of workforce and supply chain for Vineyard Wind. Vineyard Wind has an 800 megawatt project being constructed for Massachusetts, and another second project, Park City Wind, that we're working on for Connecticut. And our project, Vineyard Wind 1, we're in the final stages of permitting with BOEM. Actually, currently our supplemental environmental impact statement public comment period is open. So this will be the last federal comment period that the public can submit to. So I'd encourage everyone to please submit comments on that project to get the industry rolling. I do workforce and supply chain development. So I work really closely with our contractors and our internal team to identify the workforce needs of constructing and operating the project, as well as managing our labor relations in negotiating the project labor agreement with the local trades councils. I also work with many of you to identify where we can integrate the local supply chain into our first project, as well as any future projects. And so I'm looking forward to the panel today. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Beth, are you on?
Well, thanks for having me on this panel. It's really exciting. My name is Beth Treseder, and I'm Equinor's New England market lead. I've been in the energy industry for about 10 years now, and in the offshore wind industry for about 4 years. A little bit about Equinor. Equinor is a broad energy company. We have over 20,000 employees globally in more than 30 countries worldwide. We are the largest operator in Norway and one of the world's largest offshore operators. We have 5 decades of offshore engineering and project management expertise, and so we're really using that to expand our offshore wind business. In 2026, we expect a capacity from renewables of about 4 to 6 gigawatts, and then looking to expand that to 12 to 16 by about 2035. We have 2 leases here in the US. We have a lease directly offshore New York called Empire Wind, and a lease offshore New England called Beacon Wind, which we acquired in 2018. And our Empire Wind project is contracted to deliver 816 megawatts to the state of New York. So looking forward to the panel.
Great, thank you so much. We will flip to Matt Morrissey if he's on.
Hello, Hilary. Hi, everybody. Thanks for providing this opportunity for another important moment in the offshore wind story and our journey forward to bring clean energy at scale to the United States. So I'm Matt Morrissey. I am the head of New England markets for, well, I should say Northeast markets for Orsted U.S. Offshore Wind Power. Orsted is the global leader in offshore wind power development, having started the industry back in 1991 with a small project off the coast of Copenhagen. We are in a JV, a joint venture with our outstanding transmission partner, Eversource, in the Northeast. That's New York and New England. And we have in that region, we have 1.7 gigawatts of contracts, one of which we are very proud to say is for the state of Rhode Island. And they are Revolution Wind in Rhode Island, Revolution Wind in Connecticut, Sunrise Wind for New York, and then also South Fork for New York as well. And then in the Mid-Atlantic area, where we have some lease areas as well, we have Ocean Wind for New Jersey, and then Skipjack for Maryland. So very excited about the panel, very excited about where we are here in the state of the market's evolution, and I look forward to the conversation as we go forward.
Great, thank you, Matt. And last but not least, Christopher Hardy, are you on?
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Hardy. I'm the External Outreach and Communications Manager for Mayflower Wind. Mayflower Wind is a 50-50 joint venture between Shell and EDPR Renewables that's working to develop a sole federal offshore lease area next to our neighbors who you've just heard from, which is about 30 miles south of Martha's Vineyard and about 23 miles south of Nantucket. That has the potential to generate over 1,600 megawatts, or enough low-cost energy to power 500,000 homes. In December of 2018, Mayflower was awarded the offshore lease area. And then in January 2020, so just half a year ago, Mayflower executed a 20-year power purchase agreement with Massachusetts electric distribution companies under the state's Section 83C solicitation process that Vineyard Wind has blazed. And we are continuing to work on all of the federal, state, and permitting assessments needed to start the process further and advance so that we can begin delivering clean energy from the project by the mid-2020s. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to ask a series of questions and then ask you each to comment, and we're going to try to get to everyone. We're standing between this group and lunch, so we're going to have a lively pace and keep everyone well informed. And Chris, since you just spoke last, I'm going to ask you to start the response of this first question. It's a two-part question. In your view, what are the biggest challenges in establishing the U.S. offshore wind industry? So biggest challenges is the first part of that question. Second part, what advice would you give to companies looking to establish themselves to support this industry?
Sure, these challenges that have been well documented for over a decade now. And there's sort of some usual factors that come up, including the current regulatory schemes in the United States, add cost, complexity, risk to project developers and project development, and that can, inhibit private investments. The industry as a whole and the capacity that it requires raises questions about infrastructure readiness and the challenges and needs for dedicated ports, for staging and transporting and installing, operating these projects, and then the need for a qualified workforce that can offer cost competitive and competent local supply chains. Introduces additional delays and costs. So I think those are probably some of the most significant challenges the industry faces. And my first response to the second question about how companies can enter the industry is to listen to the previous panel on this event, this virtual event that was raised. I thought that the previous panelists raised some great insights on the supply chain dynamics that the industry is facing, particularly taking into account the perspective of the manufacturers of the pieces and the different roles that participants play. So I think the best advice is to find out where you fit in terms of the industry, and then research and sort of attack that as part of your company strategy. And one of that would be to participate in industry forums like this and gain access to the great work that Mass CEC and its counterparts in other states are doing to raise education and training and building the programs to make those kind of investments to assist companies like yours.
Great, thank you. Matt, anything to add on those two topics from your point of view?
Hey, sure. Thanks, Hilary. It's interesting to hear that question now compared to 10 years ago when, there was not a competitive landscape, when there were no long-term contracts or opportunities for long-term, programmatic legislative planning activities, when the technology was not as large or efficient. So today, when I hear that question, it's really in context to, what were the challenges back 10 years ago when there was really just no way forward. There was no policy framework forward that allowed for the competition and the other things I mentioned really mature. We're obviously there now. So it's within the context of the ramp in the United States that I would say at this point the trajectory has come so far and so rapidly, particularly on the downward pressure on price in various solicitations, that the market may indeed continue to get what the market asked for, which is a pricing that is just cratered far, far more rapidly than anyone thought possible. There is an unintended consequence of that, and that is we are a new industry. There is a need to develop infrastructure, invest in workforce, and all of the things that have been discussed earlier on panels today. But it is at some point, it's a zero-sum game, with tremendous pressure on price and a need to invest and a recognition that the industry at this stage, this early stage in the market, that there will be certain levels of inefficiency kind of at every layer of the project lifecycle. It is more costly. So at some point there will be a convergence between the downward pressure on price and all of the competitors chasing for those opportunities to be honored with contracts and the need to invest. And the commercially sensible thing to do when price is challenged or as it is in several of the last solicitations really put pressure on is to source more content out of established supply chains and less content out of non-established higher risk supply chains here in the U.S. And it's not in anyone's interest to see a slowing of that content, a slowing of the maturation and the learning to occur in this market. But as we keep going on the advance of the solicitations, and perhaps a desire on the part of markets that are offering them to see an ever declining price curve, we may actually see a slowing of the industry's ramp from a jobs and investment and infrastructure perspective here in the United States. And that dynamic, I think, could be a challenge as we look forward to the next rounds of the next 5, 6, 7 years.
Great, thank you. Beth, would you care to add anything from your point of view?
Yeah, no, when I was thinking about this, I had the same thought as Matt. We've, as an industry, already overcome so many challenges, when we look back to where we were those years ago and not having state targets for offshore wind, only a couple of companies making entry into the market, and sort of the lack of interest reflected in the lease prices. Now we're just in a completely different scenario. So I think we still have challenges, but I would say we've come a long way. In terms of, I think the challenges now are somewhat unique between the different state markets. We have challenges on the federal side, but I'd say I agree with Matt's comment about that tension between the cost pressure and the need for capital investment here in the U.S. And I think that is a significant challenge. I think the other thing is how we reconcile the urgent need to deliver on the state commitments to clean energy, balancing that with responsible renewable energy development that serves our communities long term. So it sort of comes back to that point where there's an urgency to do this, but how do we do it responsibly in the long term and make sure that we're delivering benefits to our communities, so for the environment, for the economy, and for jobs that last over the next few decades. And I think that's especially important as we think about the economic recovery from COVID. So I think our challenge now is just making sure that we deliver those long-term benefits, and to Matt's point, how we balance that with a need to bring the costs down.
Great, thank you. Jennifer, can you answer it, and you probably will anyway, just from a workforce angle, as far as challenges, what you're seeing, because I know that's a huge focus for you as well.
Yeah, right now we're kind of in the, we're in the midst of negotiating the project labor agreement for construction of Vineyard Wind 1. And it's a challenge in that we have, highly skilled tradespeople here in New England that are extremely competent at what they do. And the industry itself just poses unique challenges that we need to work through, taking existing tradespeople and having them construct a project so far offshore, utilizing equipment and vessels that they have not, used onshore. And so we're working with our contractors in determining, you know, what the best pathway is forward to get the workforce trained up. And that's going to take time too, and consistency over projects. And I know on the last panel, there was a little bit of conversation around the health and safety standards and the trainings and, you know, the specific trainings that people will need to work on offshore wind need to be recertified every couple of years. And so if we have huge gaps in projects, not only are we going to have a workforce that is going to take a while to get significant experience working offshore, but we're going to see lapses in trainings that will all need to be redone. And so that's certainly a challenge that I think it's not too big to overcome, but of course, the more certainty and predictability we have in getting these projects to come online in a timely manner, the easier it will be to overcome, similar to most of the challenges that we're facing as an industry. Just we need that predictability and that certainty for the supply chain to be able to set up and for the workforce to get appropriately trained.
Great, thank you. This sort of ties into the third question I want to jump to. I'm afraid I don't know how much time we have left, but in order to establish a U.S. offshore wind industry, there's going to be the need for regional collaboration. And I think I've spoken with all of you about this topic, but I think it's an important one to bring up again. So regional cooperation between states. In your view, what should states be doing to help the overall industry grow from a regional point of view? And I know some of the things we've brought up in the past have been around ports and things like that, but I'd love to hear from each of you. Maybe Jennifer, since you're on the screen right now, why don't you dive into that and we'll go down the line again and answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, ports is a huge one. Each project is really going to need to utilize multiple ports, and, you know, just speaking to the challenges of this industry, ports is a huge one. We don't have the port capacity here that can serve offshore wind that the European industry has. And therefore, we're going to have to kind of piecemeal these projects together utilizing ports across states. One of the big things that it seems like it should be a relatively easy one for the states to coordinate would just be the RFP timing. You know, some of the states have run RFPs that overlap with one another and are asking developers to come up with projects to bid into multiple states at the same time. And that makes it very difficult for us to manage that process, and a lot of contingent bids, which is just it's time consuming and it's technically challenging to develop that process and coordinating the timing so that there's really only one state that's going out for projects at a time would be incredibly helpful. Cross-state in terms of workforce is going to be huge as well. Again, you know, the projects will be built in the lease areas and serviced by ports moving across states. The workforce will be coming from all of those states. And in order to get to that fully trained workforce that I was mentioning earlier, workers are going to have to work on project after project. And that means that regardless of which state is procuring the energy, the workforce is going to have to be somewhat regional to meet those needs and to get us to that 100% US workforce over time. Similarly, the supply chain as well, kind of collaborating and coordinating across states in order to get as much of the local supply chain as we can. Not every state can supply every aspect of the supply chain. So understanding which state and which communities have certain strengths to feed in to the supply chain, and really honing those strengths would be incredibly helpful as the developers move forward and looking to tap as much of the local supply chain as possible.
Great, thank you. Chris, do you want to take a stab at this question from your point of view? He might be on mute.
So that again, thank you. Yeah, I would.
Chris, I think you've got
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can hear you now. Go ahead. Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. You know, I would second a lot of the comments that have been made with regard to the need for tighter state collaboration, particularly on the sequencing of the state solicitations and the delivery timeframes for projects, and that can really help optimize the supply chain thinking and the workforce development training. And then also just greater collaboration between the system operators and between the states on a sort of electrical infrastructure basis is going to be important for the long-term growth of the industry to ensure that the necessary upgrades and enhancements are there to our grid as more wind power. But that's a longer-term strategy, but still one that needs to happen on both a state and regional level. Thanks.
Thank you. Very good. Beth, can you jump in?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, as both Jennifer and Chris mentioned, I think certainty in RFP timing is helpful. And, while I certainly agree that I would love to work on only one RFP at a time, I would say even sort of more vitally important there is understanding the procurement timeline from states. So just being able to resource things and to understand, we look at our projects in sort of a phased development, and understanding how these procurements will happen across the different states is really helpful in understanding how we might want to develop our projects. And it then allows us to convey all of that information to our supply chain. And I think really that's where, from my standpoint, that regional collaboration can be beneficial. If there's clarity about what the region is looking for as a whole, then it allows the suppliers to know when they should establish facilities and ramp up production, give them assurance that there would be a continual line of customers coming up through the next decade that will validate that investment. So, I mean, I think we're very focused on the US, but there's tremendous growth in offshore wind in other areas of the world, and we're all competing for that same supply chain. And those suppliers need time to establish facilities and really ramp up their production. So, having a continuous stream of projects and customers over the next decade is hugely beneficial. So to the extent that we can think about that as a region, I think it just helps to push that understanding through not only the developers, but then down to the supply chain.
Thank you. Matt, do you agree? I know we've talked about this in the past. Anything to add on this?
Yeah, Hilary, I mean, I think that, I do agree with what everyone has said. I think the reality is there's a shared interest between the market and our commercial interest in that it would be in continuing to see cost curve reductions at a reasonable and a sustainable pace, number one. Number two, that we're building these investments or in partnerships with US companies that are sustainable over time. And that requires a real understanding that we don't want to see the boom and bust cycles that some markets in Europe have seen, where there was a local content commitment that was not necessarily sustainable. And as a result, people were employed very well during a project and then they were unemployed. That's not in anyone's interest. We want to ensure that there's a long-term horizon for any corporate partnership or investment that we're making in supply chain, so that there can be jobs that are sustained. The work that you're doing with Secretary Hilary in coordinating with the other states in New England to think about the political and commercial realities of regional supply chain development is critical, absolutely critical, because there isn't necessarily an alignment between the commercial desires for job creation in our markets that we have been so fortunate to have customers in, and at the same time, political election cycles. Both are incredibly real and incredibly substantive. And there's a magic there between sustainable long-term regional supply chain and collaboration between these kind of geographic and political markets, as well as opportunities for long-term economic development. One example is the partnership that we have formed with labor in New England, where we, instead of engaging on a state-by-state basis with building trades councils in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, we, through the leadership actually of the Rhode Island Building Trades Council and Mike Sabatoni, we established a 3-state MOU that will lead to a PLA that allows us to essentially recognize that there may be some shortages in workforce in different trades at different times. It allows us a broader landscape to draw upon. And it has very clear advantages to the building trades councils in terms of leverage and negotiation on the other side. So that would be an example of something, because of market opportunity and the scale that exists right now and competition, that could exist in the context of today's offshore wind market, a 3-state MOU that will get to a PLA.
Very good, thank you. I Avi, do we have enough time? I have another question to throw in. I just need a time check. If you're
No,
on.
we're good.
Okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
we got this running for another 10 or so minutes. Yeah.
Perfect. I want to ask a question, and I'm thinking of the audience. We've got an audience who's going to listen to this recording over and over again, and it's smaller companies perhaps thinking about getting into the supply chain. I want to flip the last question. We know that a lot of the expertise is in Europe and coming over from Europe. That's a given. There's going to be a transition at some point to a more localized, expertise here and manufacturing here in the US. What do you think? I'm going to change the question a little bit. In your opinion, and I know you're at the top of the supply chain, so many of your technical partners will be filling these supply chain roles. If you think of the Northeast, in your opinion, can you identify a couple of sectors that maybe make sense for this region? And this is a super unfair question because I'm putting you on the spot. You can punt or pivot, but trying to get a little specific for the audience and thinking about innovation, getting into the supply chain. Does something come to mind that makes sense in the Northeast? Beth, let's go to you and see your thoughts on this.
Great. Thanks. Well, I'll take a first cut and then kick it over to my fellow panelists. I think one of the biggest assets that we have in this market is a focus on the blue economy, on innovation. We have a great training, great research institutions. So I think we really need to focus on innovation. I think there's been a lot of great work in the supply chain and a lot of development in Europe, but there's an opportunity similar to what we've done in cost. I think Matt referenced it earlier. We've seen cost declines in the US, unlike what we saw in Europe. Similarly, I think there's a lot of untapped innovation on the technology space. And I think that New England is primed to take advantage of that. So it's not necessarily maybe a single area of the supply chain, but allowing all companies to think about sort of expanding their technology and pushing the boundaries there in research and development. I think that's just, again, an area that's ripe for innovation. And I think we have the skills in Rhode Island and in New England to really take advantage of that. I think that all of the offshore wind companies, as a function of being an offshore wind company, you're already sort of innovative. So I think all the companies are primed to look towards innovative technologies to make their projects more efficient.
Great, thank you. And maybe Matt, you can follow up on that and maybe talk a little bit about the innovation hub that you guys are focusing on. That's a good segue, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. The need that exists right now, I think, from our perspective, is the incentives for local content and engaging in local companies into the supply chain is clearly there. It becomes a matter now of how do you identify those companies efficiently and get them through a process within the whatever bureaucracy, the evaluative bureaucracy that your company employs, to make sure that there is a qualification process and they can get onto a project as rapidly as possible, number one. Number two, there is untapped potential in the United States for technology advance. We in every industry have had a history of starting small and then through various cycles very, very rapidly go very big in every tech industry, in fact. So offshore is no different. We'll see the same thing occur here. So today, it's critical that we establish a front door, a way that companies in the US that are involved in the elements of various areas of our supply chain, but not obviously in our supply chain because it does not exist, have a way to contact us, to make connection with a human being, and then to be facilitated around the interior of the company to find where they go with their technology, their new innovation perhaps, to learn more about areas where they can play and help make more efficient, more safe, or less costly our technologies. So that's a very active conversation. It has been for years within Orsted about how we deal with this in the United States. And just recently, this last March, we we announced that at the Providence CIC, we would locate our only U.S. offshore wind supply chain and innovation hub. That's led by Neil Hamill, a Rhode Island resident. And we would essentially seek to provide that front door opportunity for local companies that are not otherwise already in a procurement process on any of our asset projects. And at the same time, go through, if appropriate, if their technology is early stage enough, go through a thorough but fast acting evaluation process to figure out whether or not these are a company can be a company that we want to partner with as we advance their technology in our understanding of the
Great. Thank you, Matt.
particular project. We're tremendous tapping into Rhode Island's blue innovation economy. It's very, very exciting.
Great. Thank you. I think Chris and then Jennifer, if Chris, you could take a stab at this question and then we'll flip to Jennifer.
Yes, I would say investments in marine science, technology. Can you hear me?
You're back. Yeah, it's a little spotty, but you're back.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm having terrible technology problems, and that's actually one area I think where Massachusetts can succeed. And I think its competitive advantage over the decades has been honed in the relationships between the research institutions and educational institutions to help drive innovation. So I don't want to continue on that theme to prolong that theme, but we have certainly a remarkable set of institutions from which various companies can spring, and that's clearly part of Massachusetts' competitive advantage. But there are other opportunities, I think, as Mark was alluding to, as far as the role of others in the supply chain that can enjoy some of the spillover benefits. But clearly the technology innovation also promotes safety, which is critical for the long-term operations of all of our projects. All of our companies have a deep commitment to safety and the use of technology to help survey and monitor projects over the long term, reduces risk to humans and can help with cost savings for projects.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah, I don't have a ton additional to add. I completely agree with what all my colleagues mentioned. Just one other thing, I think that the innovation is key, and not even necessarily innovation in offshore wind, but innovation in how we're going to meet the unique challenges that the U.S. presents to the industry in terms of our limited port capacity, some of the other compliance issues that we deal with here that haven't been an issue overseas, in previous development. And so really looking at what the unique challenges are here in the U.S. market and how we're going to innovate and develop and advance technology that can help us meet those challenges.
Thank you. Avi, do we want to flip to any questions that may have come in on the chat? And I would also invite anyone on the panel. I know I moved very quickly. If there's something I didn't ask that you want to share with the group, just jump in. In the meantime, Avi, if you have any questions that might be applicable to this excellent panel.
I think that's a great idea. We have about 5 minutes to slowly wrap things up, so we can have time for a few more questions. And yes, we've dropped down a little bit, and so I think that's a perfect opportunity for people to just feel free to unmute themselves and share a thought or two.
Hilary, I have two quick comments.
Yes.
One, as we think about local content and supply chain, it can't be overstated the importance of the state work. I don't know how many states are on this call. The state work that can be done to help companies identify local partners that are indeed interested in bidding into our commercial bidding process at whatever level. In making sense of the local workforce and business landscape is critical. Anything that states can do in the way that Rhode Island does it, frankly, is a very real aid to that process. I just wanted to make sure that was highlighted.
Yeah, and that's actually, thank you for that, because I think when we talk to companies overseas who want to come and land in the US to take advantage of the growth of this market, or we talk to companies who are manufacturing or producing something in the US who want to pivot and come into this market, they need help in understanding how to navigate. And that's what these state agencies will do. That's what Commerce will do. We work really closely with Bruce, who's excellent at Mass CEC, Connecticut, and so forth down the line. So all of these companies absolutely should use their state agencies as a resource to help them navigate, make introductions, plug them in. And I think that's a really good point.